Okay, so welcome to today's Convergence lecture. This is, as some of you know, this is a series of lectures that the Center for Translation Studies at the University of Surrey is organizing on more or less regular basis, and where we invite very well-known researchers to present their research on topics related to translation, interpreting, accessibility, and I have the pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who is Dragoș Ciobanu, and he's a professor of computational terminology and machine translation at the University of Vienna, also the Center for Translation Studies were there. And I believe you heard his name. I believe you know about his research. He's very well known for the work he's doing on localization, workflow, how to improve them using speech technology and both recognition and generation. He leads the research center at the Center for Translation Studies that researches human and artificial intelligence in translation. And he developed a quite well-known group of researchers that focus on various topics related to human translation and AI in translation. He also collaborates with language service providers from around the world, where he provides training and for international organizations trying to maximize the use of language localization and project management technologies. And some of you may know about his research from a quite well-cited chapter that was recently published in the Routledge Handbook of Translation and Technology, where he talks about speech recognition and speech synthesis in translation workflows. And I believe very much of the research he's going to present today is related to this topic. So thank you very much, Dragoș, for accepting our invitation. And we're really looking forward to learning more about your work and your research.
Thank you very much, Konstantin, and thank you for the super kind introduction. Thank you and your colleagues as well for the very kind invitation. Before I start, how shall we do it? Shall we take questions at the end, or do you have a preferred format?
Probably it's easier if it's at the end because of the kind of online mode. I will keep an eye on the chat, trying to moderate there, and if there is anything that is really urgent, I'll interrupt you. But probably it's easier, unless you want to pause and ask the audience for questions, engage. I would say probably the easiest would be to have the questions at the end. But for the audience, please feel free to post your questions in the chat when they come to your mind, so you don't forget them. We will have time at the end to discuss them, answer.
Brilliant. Thank you. So thank you again, and thank all the participants. The numbers are going. I'm very grateful to everyone for giving up their time to come and hopefully find a bit of inspiration, some reasons to consider the use of speech technologies as a translator or reviser or a post editor. A couple of words of introduction. My background is in languages. I studied English and French in Romania at the University of Iași, and then I did a master's in translation and interpreting. I was very fortunate to be taught by Professors Rodica Dimitriu, Dumitru Dorobăț, and then I went to Leeds. I still refer to it as if it's my home. So I went to Leeds in 2003 and started working with translation technologies, also worked on my PhD under the supervision of Professor Tony Hartley, and also got to know how interpreters work through very kind mentorship from Dr. Svetlana Karsten. So throughout my experience so far, I have tried to merge these perspectives from the academia as well as from the professional practice. I've also been very interested in seeing how different members of the language services industry work, what kind of technologies they use. And it was super interesting to see an external perspective as well as refer back to my time as an in-house technical writer and translator. So what am I doing now? Now I'm in Vienna, where I was very fortunate to be able to set up a research group called the High Trans Research Group, Human and Artificial Intelligence in Translation. And the highlight for me is that I was joined by some really interesting people, and you know, in a way, my job is one of the best ones in the world because I get to learn from all of them all the time. So we have Dr. Alina Sekara, who is specializing in audiovisual translation, accessibility as well. We have Dr. Miguel Rios, who is our machine translation guru, and we have three doctoral students, Claudia, Raluca, and Justus, who are all working on topics related to the use of speech technologies by professional translators, or also by amateur translators, as we will see. So our focus and some of the things I will touch upon in this presentation are aligned with our priorities as a research group. So first of all, we are really interested in the use of speech technologies in translation, revision, and post-editing. And as Konstantin was saying, we're interested in both the dictation part, so automatic speech recognition, but also in the speech synthesis part, so text-to-speech. We are interested in how translators can benefit, but also how revisers, how post-editors as well. And I'll give you examples. We're also interested more generally in technology-supported translation, revision, and post-editing. And this is why we also work on machine translation, neuro-machine translation, and we customize our own engines, and then we use them in our experiments. Specifically, at the moment, we are running a couple of projects with medical machine translation, which was domain adapted by Miguel. And we also look at translation technology for accessibility, and Alina and Raluca have been working particularly on identifying and investigating lexical bias and structural analysis of audio introductions in theater plays. And finally, of course, because what we do may be interesting to us, but actually we have a responsibility to the future of the industry as well as the research community. We teach and we try to share with our students all this experience, knowledge, and also learn from them about machine translation literacy, and the use of technologies. So today, what I was planning to do was to give you what, how, and why of speech technologies as they are used by some professionals, and as they hopefully, maybe as a result of today's discussion with all of you, maybe they will start being used more by professionals and also by trainees. So first of all, what am I talking about? Text-to-speech, otherwise also known as TTS, is the automatic synthesis of a electronic text. So it's really a computer talking to you, or a smart device talking in inverted commas, but reading out loud an electronic text that you ask it to. This is quite different from ASR, automatic speech recognition, which involves a person dictating, or it can also involve a computer program automatically recognizing speech and transcribing an audio recording. So it's these two sometimes are confused a little bit when we talk with the general public, but they are two separate and equally useful in their own rights components of the speech technologies area. So I'll give you examples actually of both of them. So first of all, I'll start with text-to-speech, which I mentioned first. And this is a screenshot, but I'll actually go to the proper software. This is a screenshot from Trados Studio, which I'm sure lots of people are familiar with. It is a computer-assisted translation tool. And thanks to an add-in, which can be connected to the Microsoft Azure voices, synthetic voices, a translator or reviser or post editor, basically any user of this CAT tool can listen to the computer reading out loud either the source or the target. Let's have a listen. So I am now in the software that I mentioned. And I will start, first of all, I will play the target, which is a Romanian translation of an English source text. So let's just hear how human-like are these voices that I'm talking about. So here comes the Romanian. And oh, by the way, if you can't hear it, please let me know, because I've got other examples and we need all of you to be able to hear it.
Adulți programați pentru o intervenție chirurgicală bariatrică laparoscopică elective.
Okay, let's listen to it from the beginning.
Am studiat prospectiv 1357 pacienți adulți programați pentru o intervenție chirurgicală bariatrică laparoscopică elective.
Did that come through? Nervous wait time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everything fine.
Fantastic. Thank you. So that's the artificial Romanian synthesis. And already for a reviser who is listening to this text, at least two things that could be improved about this translation jump up. But we'll talk about that. Let's also, since we're here, let's have a listen to the source, just to give you an impression of how well supported English is, because you might think, well, this is just a tool for Romanian.
We prospectively studied 1357 adult patients scheduled for elective laparoscopic bariatric surgery.
Okay, so again, we can have a chat at the end about prosody and how natural these voices sound, but that's one example in a CAT tool. Now, some people in the audience might be a bit disappointed because they just don't use Studio. So what options do they have? Well, there are voices already available in Microsoft Word. So let's have just a quick demo. I'm in Word, I'm in a bilingual document, actually exported from Trados Studio, but you can export such a bilingual document from pretty much any CAT tool. And I'm asking Microsoft Word in the review panel to read aloud the source as well as the target. Let's have a listen.
We prospectively studied 1357 adult patients scheduled for elective laparoscopic bariatric surgery.
Am studiat în mod prospectiv 1357 de pacienți adulți programați pentru chirurgie bariatrică laparoscopică.
4.
Okay. So that is what I mean, well, what anyone means really, when they talk about speech synthesis. Now, how about dictation? So automatic speech recognition, the second aspect that I mentioned. Well, if you want to have a play, there are several ways, and some of them are already used by professionals. Others are used in other scenarios. If you don't have a custom dictation tool such as Dragon Naturally Speaking, for instance, which supports, unfortunately, only a few languages, you can still dictate and you can still experiment with integrating dictation into your workflows. So, for instance, now I'm in a Google Doc. I go into Tools, Voice Typing. The language is remembered. The last language that you use for dictation is remembered. So I will enable the microphone and I'll dictate something. We need to encourage professional translators to use available technologies more effectively, full stop. So not bad. I need to correct one thing, but otherwise it's actually pretty good recognition. What about if I'm working, or if someone in the audience is working in another language? Are we stuck? Because yet again, English is the most well-resourced language. Actually, not really, because you can go and choose, again, it's a limited range, but it is a range of languages. And let me try my Romanian. Let's see how good it still is. Traducătorii profesioniști trebuie încurajați să folosească mai eficient tehnologiile relevante actuale. And here, I just paused a little bit because I wanted to check the recognition. Unless you're Romanian, you kind of have to take my word for it, or maybe Constantin can also confirm that the recognition was perfect in this case. So this is, let's go back to the slides. This is what I meant by speech technologies. So I've given you the examples, and you can also see how accessible these technologies are becoming, and also you got a bit of a taster of what they sound like in the case of synthesis, but also how you need to speak in the case of dictation, so speech recognition, because there's still a few misconceptions, a few myths, and some professionals are still put off using these, or at least experimenting with these technologies, because they are told, well, they sound really robotic, or you have to speak like a robot. And as you can see, it's really no longer the case. Where have we come across automatic speech recognition as well as text-to-speech before? To be honest, we are surrounded by them. So I'm not stating any new major discovery when I'm saying that I'm sure lots of you in the audience have experimented with virtual assistants, with Google Assistant, Siri, Cortana, Alexa, etc. And also some of you might have even played with speech translation apps. So in speech-to-speech translation, not only do you have both automatic speech recognition and for some languages also automatic synthesis, so text-to-speech, but you also have a middle machine translation component, which can be with or without English as a pivot language, but still it's these seemingly easy to use and very maybe even easy to design on the first view. These applications actually are very complex, and there is a lot of technology behind them. And it's really genuinely amazing that we can have them for still a limited range of languages, but we have access to them for some languages. Now, the title was a bit, I don't know how to call the title that I sent. Tiny bit critical, perhaps. I don't know. A bit. Yeah. Let's stick with critical. That's diplomatic enough. About the tools that we translators use and are sometimes forced to use by our clients, that they aren't really up with the times, up to date. So I quite like and dislike this screenshot from the Taos report a few years ago, because the evolution of the translation technology landscape as seen by Taos provides aspects to be quite excited about. So for instance, now in 2022, we should be living in the age of convergence, where all content is personalized. There are lots of machine translation implementations between a lot of languages. We are also living in, or we should be living in, the age of real-time customized machine translation. Can you still, I hope you can still.
Yeah, you froze for a bit, but yeah.
I froze for a bit. Okay,
yeah.
I'm back on.
Yeah.
So in this screenshot, you can see that the future that we should be living in hasn't actually quite arrived yet. And also in terms of technology, we are still using quite outdated technology. And in some of our training courses, we even showing students technologies that were maybe state of the art in the 90s, but they should really be updated. And the area of speech technologies is one particular area which should be updated. So just again, don't know exactly who is in the audience, but for those of you who haven't had much experience with computer-assisted translation tools, this is pretty much what they look like. You have an area where the source content is segmented and presented. You have an area where the target content is translated by the translator or post-edited if it's a post-editing job.
Excuse me, Dragoș.
Sorry. Hi.
We're still seeing the image from, or at least me, from Taos.
From Taos. Okay,
Yeah.
Let me stop my share and let me reshare. Okay. How about now?
Yeah, now we see it.
Our own studio. Perfect. Thank you. And please let me know if this thing continues. I am on a wired connection. Would you believe it? Hey. So as I was mentioning, we have an area on the sort of center left for the source. We have an area on the center right for the target. We have an area above where the translator sees suggestions either from a translation memory or from machine translation. And we have an area to the right, top right, where the translator sees terminology suggestions. And there are a few more buttons for formatting and other useful features along the top, but that's pretty much it. And this is pretty much the situation, regardless of the CAT tool that you use. This is another screenshot from another tool, MemoQ, where you have an added benefit of a more visible preview, but the layout tends to be the same. And this is a bit interesting because, and also a bit disappointing at the same time, simply because speech technologies, at least dictation, isn't a new thing. So back in when the Beatles were making a big impact on the music stage, the famous or the infamous ALPAC report, apart from kind of killing machine translation research for about 10 years, it also suggested that actually, instead of investing in machine translation, maybe researchers and translators should look more closely at dictation, because you could be 4 times more productive, they estimated at that time, by dictating. And of course, they were talking about a different kind of implementation of dictation. But still, we were talking about the usefulness of speech for a very long time. But it took several decades and until some of the CAT tools that most of us use have moved in that direction and have started integrating various features. So for instance, MemoQ now has an integration for dictation. And also a few years back, the big companies with huge research centers that all of us admire, I'd say, have also started reporting very good results in terms of the quality of the synthesis. And of course, we need to take with a pinch of salt all these grand statements about how a voice generating artificial intelligence algorithm is now indistinguishable from humans, because as we all know, the testing data doesn't always tell the full story, but such promises are exciting and useful. And in terms of the industry response, in 2020, we had in the language industry survey report produced by GALA and ELIA and EUATC and European Masters in Translations Network. We saw that there were quite a good number of freelancers who were using dictation tools in their work. Now, that number kind of dropped by 2022, and this is a screenshot from the latest report, the Ellis survey. But at the same time, we're seeing that automatic speech recognition and dictation, which are really the same thing, they're getting two different categories. And that's explained by the fact that you have now, with the rise of video content and with specific workflows involving handling that kind of content, you have an automatic stage of speech recognition of those audio files or video files, which is seen by the industry as being a separate thing from translators dictating or live subtitlers re-speaking, or I don't know, any other kind of professional who is using dictation for other purposes. So the reality is changing, but kind of a little bit slowly. So to sum up, we've seen what I'm talking about. How are these technologies accessible? I've given you some examples, but let's wrap up before I move on to the next section. So we have convenient-ish automatic speech recognition, which I've demonstrated in Google Docs, but you can also access through Microsoft in Microsoft Office. And it's also built into some CAT tools that are available. MadeCat, probably lots of people know. Eluna is the UN CAT tool, so fewer people would have access to that. ASR and text-to-speech together, you could use within some CAT tools if you have additional technologies such as Dragon Naturally Speaking, and it is supported to some extent by some of the CAT tools around. So some will support such technologies fully, others will limit some of the features. If you are looking for better text-to-speech, then the Trader Studio plugin that I've demonstrated, that will offer you some of the best available text-to-speech, especially in a CAT tool. And if you want just okay-ish recognition, but also synthesis, then you could use accessibility features in whatever device you are using, as well as screen reading software. So that's how you get to it. And if there's nothing else that interests you today, I'm hoping that this screenshot, you've already taken a screenshot and you'll go and experiment a little bit. And now here comes the question, why? Why would you even consider either dictation or using speech synthesis, or even both? So first question can be, well, this question can receive many answers. And one of them could be because what we have found in our research so far is that the users of such technologies, especially the users of dictation, they mention as main reasons for doing that the higher quality and also the higher productivity which they achieve when they translate. So this curiosity of how speech technologies influence and hopefully help professional linguists has led to a couple of articles which you can find online, and you're very welcome to chat to me about if there's anything interesting in them. So these two refer to surveys of professional translators who are using mainly speech recognition. Speech synthesis is mentioned by a few, but not so many. And in our research group, Raluca will be investigating how the professionals working with English and Romanian will, how their workflow will change, and also what the quality of the output will be when they introduce dictation into their workflow by comparison to post-editing machine translation. So Raluca's future project, or current project that she's working on, is about investigating the translation of informed consent forms using machine translation, but also using speech technologies. and Miguel is contributing to this project as well. So apart from productivity and quality, why else would you want to even consider these technologies? Well, because of this attention element, which we are starting to find more and more in our research, attention while translating or revising, and even when post-editing, as I'll mention. So this refers mainly to synthesis this time. So listening to the computer speaking out the translation for you, or the original, and was inspired by a participant that we had in Leeds when Alena and I were organizing with our colleagues training events for the UN and the EU translators. We had Isabel Delpech from the European Space Agency, who was talking about their workflow, in-house workflow, where one translator would read the translation that another translator had produced, while the original translator would look at the source, and the first person would read out loud, looking for maybe fluency errors in the target text, while the original translator would listen and read the source to investigate whether there are any accuracy errors, any omissions, mistranslations, etc. And when we heard this, I think it was back in 2012, we started immediately thinking, okay, but what about the translators who do not actually have someone next door that they can just walk to and have this exchange? Is there any way in which we can use current technologies to achieve at least a similar effect? Because of course we won't get the same effect. You don't have two brains. You'll have the original brain and an artificial intelligence helper, let's say. So it's a bit like having a virtual body in a way. And what we started doing in Leeds, together with Valentina Ragni, was to investigate the impact of speech synthesis on the revision process. We set up an experiment, and we eye-tracked our participants as well. And we looked to see whether the participants who were revising a text while also listening to the source segments being spoken out performed any differently from participants who were revising in silence in a traditional environment. So it was another opportunity to have some fun. And the three of us went into the lab, and we had a setup where an eye tracker, so this device in the middle, would look to and would record where exactly our participants would look on the screen while they were revising in the CAT tool, in order to see what we were also interested in was whether this new way of working with speech synthesis would actually increase the cognitive load of an already demanding expert task. So translation and revision is, nobody denies, are complex expert tasks, and we didn't want the new workflow that we were proposing to add to that, to make it even harder for the experts. So I think I'm playing a movie. I'm not going to do that. So let me just skip to this to give you an idea of what kind of data we collected during the experiment. So we had our CAT tool, in this case it was MemoQ, our source and our target text from French into English, and then we recorded the fixations as well as saccades and the gaze path of our participants. We overlay them and we compared the two groups that we had. And what was very interesting and then of course encouraging was to see that the group who revised with source sound, so artificial source sound, they identified quite a few more errors of accuracy than the other group who revised in silence. They also did better in terms of fluency and style, but accuracy really jumped up. And when we were also reading the impressions of our participants, their justifications or their feedback focused on this idea that speech technologies are good for focus, for attention. Also, hearing the source sound allowed some of them to check that all the information and also the same logic was to be found in the target text, which is pretty much the same effect that I described from the European Space Agency. Also, some said that they noticed errors in the translation as a result of hearing the source. Otherwise, they would have skipped over, or it would have been very easy to skip over them. So this idea of picking up subtle content errors because of this auditive channel is a very interesting one, we think, and has a great potential. And also, some of the participants were coining new terms in a way. So proof listening instead of proofreading. They seem to appreciate that. But of course, it wasn't all, I don't know what the expression is, but roses and rainbows and unicorns. There were also a minority, it has to be said, but still, for some of our participants, this new way of working didn't actually work. They felt, a couple of them, they felt that it disrupted their usual way of approaching the revision. And this really must be taken into account as well. So we are not looking for a one-size-fits-all kind of solution, but we are looking to see whether and if how can current technologies make the work of and the tasks that the translators have to complete more manageable and increase the quality, maybe also increase the productivity. So based on that experiment, which we conducted in Leeds, then when we came to Vienna, we thought, how about post-editing? Especially now, because we have these neural machine translation engines, which are producing output that is rather fluent, and it's quite easy to fool, especially inexperienced translators. Can speech technologies help with increasing the quality and also maybe also the productivity? And this is a topic which Claudia is looking at in the context of multilingual crisis communication. And also Justus is looking at, his study will involve institutional translators. Konstantin, am I still?
Yeah, you disappeared again for a bit.
I disappeared.
But yeah, it's fine. All fine now.
It's fine now? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks.
It happens.
Apologies.
No need to apologize. It's yeah, it happens.
We're literally melting in Vienna, and maybe, I don't know, the fiber optic is also melting. I have no idea. I've now shown everyone I have no idea how fiber optic works. Coming back to speech. So we have two of our pre-doc colleagues. They are investigating these topics, and we're excited to see what they find. And also because it involves machine translation, our local machine translation guru is also on hand as ever, kindly helping them. And this is, it doesn't need a lot of time. I'm sure lots of people are familiar with Philip Cohen's work on statistical as well as neural machine translation. But this quote just reinforces that point, that compared to statistical machine translation, neural machine translation may be less adequate, even though it could be more fluent. So these are really big alarm bells for all the post editors, for all the translators out there. And a lot of attention needs to be paid to the fact that sometimes in neural machine translation, the engine might not translate parts of the sentence, or it might hallucinate, or in other words, generate unrelated output words. These are not just possibilities, these are actually happening. So translators have to deal with such situations, and the question becomes, can speech technologies help? Because neural machine translation post-editing especially is really becoming a bit of like driving a driverless car. So you are asked by the client to sit in, strap up, but don't intervene until there is a big error or something major is happening. Otherwise, just reuse as much of the machine translation output as possible, etc., etc. And just like pretty much anyone who has tried being in a self-driving car, this is actually a really hard thing to do. The anxiety, the fear, the trepidation is there definitely, and there's always the possibility of missing things just because you kind of get carried by the flow. Just like it's possible to miss very minute but very significant machine translation errors just because the rest of the sentence looks very fluent. So what I'm going to end the presentation with are a few thoughts and also a few findings from the project that we conducted on post-editing machine translation in the context of translator training. So in this experiment, we only had students. In the LEADS experiment, we had a mix of postgraduate students and professional translators. And this work was done in collaboration with Claudia, Justus, and Alina. And we also presented, so apologies if some of you have already attended our presentations, either at the LODS TAV colloquium or at EAMT conference in Ghent. But what did we do and what did we find? We had an experiment with 17 students working from English into German. Most of our students, the vast majority, were BA students. And we had an online experiment in 2021 because we couldn't get anyone in labs, just like pretty much everyone here. What we asked was our students to annotate as well as post-edit, fully post-edit, a text which was split into 4 parts. We also had an initial error annotation and post-editing workshop because our participants did not have much, if any, post-editing experience. And we had 2 experiment sessions. For each part, 45 minutes was allowed. We also had a feedback session because we wanted this to be meaningful for our participants as well. And we conducted questionnaires throughout the project. We initially asked all participants, we split them into 2 groups, but we asked everyone initially to post-edit in silence, just like normally. I mean, the most common setup. And then we switched groups so that one group would post-edit by listening to the source sound, while the other would post-edit using the target sound. And then in the 3rd condition, we would switch again. And finally, in the 4th condition, both groups post-edited with both source and target source sound. And we use Microsoft Word because it was the easiest way of ensuring that everyone had the same setup on their computers and we could run this experiment remotely. And it was just using the read aloud function. As you can see in the screenshot, we had the English source in the first column, the machine translation in German in the second column, and then again the same machine translation in the 3rd column. And we suggested to our participants to first annotate any errors they could see in the 2nd column, and then post-edit, so correct them in the 3rd column, just to keep things nicely organized. So we had these 2 groups, and also the machine translation output came from Google Translate, which was in between as quality between DeepL and Microsoft Translator. So we believe that this was pose a nice challenge, a moderate challenge to our participants. And the text itself was a theater play, and we chose it because, or an excerpt from a theater play. We chose it because we thought it was a good example of a text which was written to be spoken, and we were interested to see whether automatic speaking, so automatic speech synthesis, would influence the performance of our participants in any way. So this kind of really says exactly what I've just described now. So what did we find? Because I'm guessing I should wrap up in about 3 minutes, Konstantin.
It's okay. It's not that strict, so take your time.
I'm in Austria. Yeah. It's, we are going by the...
Oh, we are Romanians. That's okay.
Okay. I'll try not to rush, but also...
Yeah, I think it's more interesting to hear the results properly rather than rush to stick to the time. So
okay, thank you. That's very kind. Okay, so what did we find? First of all, we looked at the quality of the corrections of our participants by comparing their performance with a gold standard that our team produced, especially 2 members of our team who had experience of as professional translators. So they have about 4.5 years between them on average. Sorry, on average, because each one has about 4 and just over 4 and just under 5 years. So first of all, we looked at whether the silent condition by comparison with the speech conditions was any different. And what we noticed, first of all, you see group 1 in the source text sound and then group 2 in the target text sound, they perform worse. And because of the setup that I've described, that was the condition in which they for the first time, for all of them, they came across post-editing with speech. So this is a very interesting suggestion that whenever we introduce a new piece of technology in even a trainee workflow, let alone also a translator workflow, we shouldn't be surprised if there is a period of drop in performance. And we would hope then that the performance would pick up again and hopefully even exceed the initial performance. This is what we have seen actually by the end of the experiment. We're seeing slightly higher numbers of errors being corrected as a group. So these are averages for the whole group. Again, some of you might be disappointed. You might say, well, this is really low. I mean, only 50%-ish of errors. This is ridiculous. Surely bad students, or I don't know. But actually, these findings are fairly consistent with work of other researchers looking at post-editing as well as revision. And there is a very interesting chapter by Live Maken and also Joke Dems, who got very similar results, but of course for different texts from professional translators. So it's interesting, but it's also a reality. So by the end of the experiment, our students who were getting more and more used to using speech, the best results, so their best performance was in the condition where they listened to both source and target. Now, whether this is only because we introduced this technology or also because they were getting used to the text and the environment, we can't really say, and nobody can say in these experiments. But from their comments, the same threads that I mentioned in the revision experiment were coming up. So, attention to more subtle errors or to errors they would have skipped over was mentioned often. In terms of productivity, again, even though the first group actually on average performed best in the target text sound condition, again, by comparison to the silent condition, their productivity also went up by quite a bit. So that's also interesting. And in terms of attitudes, of course, if you ask someone, how do you feel now that you've experimented with a new piece of technology? They're quite likely to tell you that it was annoying and time consuming and distracting and confusing and etc. etc. But actually then when you show them the results and you say, okay, but congratulations, you've actually done quite a lot better than initially. They have a bit of an aha moment, or, you know, at least they pause for thought and they try to, well, they start to reconsider their approach. What I also am very keen, and all of us in our team are very keen to point out, is that averages tell one story, but as we can see here, for all these 4 conditions, so the colors represent the conditions and the P's represent the individual participants, we see quite a lot of variation in the individual performance. So again, on average, we can say the performance went up, the productivity went up, fantastic, let's implement speech technologies everywhere. But in practice, as responsible educators and trainers, we should also look at individual differences and recognize that such a solution might not actually work for everyone, or some participants will have different needs and will need different support. But, you know, overall, on average, for the group, it was a useful intervention. Also, in terms of feedback, qualitative feedback, as I was saying, similar threads. I'm indeed more focused and caught some errors I would have overlooked otherwise, but because it is a new way of working, it's also more time consuming and a bit awkward. Now, if we look at this element, the time consuming part, and we look at the productivity and we see how much that has actually grown, again, we need, it's good evidence that as humans, we don't always interpret and really self-evaluate as well as we might want to. So again, for anyone who's conducting research experiments, any students in the audience, please try and have several points of view, several lenses through which you investigate someone's performance. So just having a questionnaire or just having an observation is not enough. We also need some more data points. And just together, they will start building a picture. Another element that we found was in relation to under annotation. So this is specific to the number of errors that were identified first, so annotated, and then corrected by the students. So here we looked at the identification mainly, and we saw that between the first and the fourth part, the majority of our participants also missed fewer errors. So these minuses here mean that their performance improved by, let's say, 27% for P4, 21% for P6. So they identified more errors. They missed fewer errors in the machine translation output. So again, this is very encouraging. Whether this is only due to listening to the source, we can't really see, or the target, we can't really say, but it's surely part of this equation, part of this improvement. With variation between participants, and also with an interesting additional remark that all of our native speakers noticed improvements, whereas only some of our non-native German speakers noticed such improvements, and actually they, some of them, the majority of them, performed worse. So again, we are finding little windows which might suggest that such techniques might be useful perhaps more for post-editors who are natives, or maybe we need additional training for the non-natives, etc. So wrapping up, we found that the last condition, where the participants saw both source and target sound, well, listen to rather than saw, was more conducive to over-annotation, pretty much for everyone. So in general, everyone just annotated more errors. They thought there were more things wrong with the text than with the machine translation output than actually were. But the fact that just post-editing in silence is more conducive to missing errors is also interesting. So, having the sound and having these results that in the sound condition, the participants identified and missed fewer errors. So identified more errors, missed fewer errors is, I think, very encouraging. Also, we noticed that participants who had a very negative attitude right from the start towards the use of such technologies, they also performed worse. And again, this is no surprise in the industry. We have many examples of companies reporting such effects, such situations as well. And generally, a positive attitude was reflected in an improved error annotation performance as well. So again, this is genuine advice for any student, any aspiring translator, any trainee translator in the audience. Just keep an open mind and experiment and try things out. You never know what you will find that is going to make you that little bit better. The error annotation part, we have to admit, it was, sometimes it raises eyebrows because generally in a post-editing test or experiment, the researchers just ask the participants to take machine translation output and improve it. But we wanted also for the students to stop and think and identify errors first, annotate them, label them, and then correct them. And this was led to some interesting feedback. So regarding error identification, P18 told us that by listening to the segments in the target language that were translated only by a machine, so the raw output, I can detect errors more easily as the translation sounds unnatural to me. In terms of content comprehension, also we had positive evaluations. So speech synthesis made understanding sentences with slang words much easier. I could understand the spoken words in the context of the sentence better, even though I had never heard them before. Extremely interesting observation. And then for the specific task of annotating errors, this additional step, which actually didn't take that long, was viewed as beneficial because now the participants had a much clearer picture of what kind of errors they needed to correct. Otherwise, if you speak to post editors, some of them are never sure whether they've done enough or maybe they've done too much. Whereas with this particular step, we were really allowing the students or enabling this, empowering the students even to rest assured that they were correcting only what needed to be corrected. The fact that they missed some errors also shows that we still need to train our students. It's not like post-editing just grows on trees and is just absorbed by osmosis or something like that. But the fact that there is this aspect of training, the error annotation part, is useful to provide a structure. And this structure can also be carried on further for feedback between translators, for objective feedback, which is based on error categories and error typologies that everyone understands. Right, that was that. What are we going to do in the future? Well, no surprise there. We would like to replicate these studies and also involve professional post editors. And we are very excited to be the recipients of one of the imminent 2022 grants. And will involve different text types, different language pairs. And we really believe that it's time now to integrate properly text-to-speech in post-editing workflows, but also in translation workflows, in revision workflows. We have the technology, we just need to tweak the tools a little bit. Because there are benefits of these technologies for error identification, for content comprehension. So we really don't have many excuses not to have up-to-date environments. We also are doing, and thanks to Konstantin, to Sabine, to their team, through these this talks series, we have the opportunity to spread the word. So hopefully we will encourage some of you to go and experiment with speech technologies, be that dictation or be that synthesis. I have given you a few pointers, and I'm sure you can find others as well. So just go out and try and find out the ideal, the most ergonomic, the most effective environment for you. So that's it from us. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. We are looking forward to collaborating with other universities as well as members of the industry, and we are in several organizations at the moment. So please feel free to get in touch with us, and I look forward to your questions. Apologies for going over the projected 45 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for such an interesting talk. I think no one is sorry that you went on and presented everything.
Well, everyone's super nice. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I don't know, maybe it's easier if you stop sharing the screen so we can see more people. And I see that Anna has raised her hand and probably she wants to ask a question. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand, type in the chat. If I could ask the audience to turn on the video, I think it's nicer at this stage for Dragoș to see more faces.
And see friends.
Yeah.
Hello.
So Anna, please.
Thank you very much, Dragoș. This was an amazing talk, and lovely to see you again in Vienna. What I would like to ask, because in all your experiments, if I understood correctly, you have the sound, but you maintain the visual element. Have you tried any variations in which the translators or the post editors do not see the written cues, but only listen to the source text or listen to the machine translation output? Have you tried this?
No, we haven't. So we have good friends among the interpreters. So I'm guessing that would also involve a collaboration with the interpreting team. No, you're right. So far, we have kept the silent condition as a common thread, simply because it's the most common way of revising or post-editing at the moment. And then we compared the sound conditions with the silent, but we haven't taken the visual away. No, that sounds exciting. On that, a little remark would be that, very interestingly, initially when we started the experiments, so back in Leeds, we had the revision experiment, and we recruited our postgraduates and our professionals. And in our initial questionnaire, we asked them about interpreting experience or training, because we kind of hypothesized that for those who had interpreting experience, this condition, listening to the source, would be like interpreting or very similar to interpreting, and they would have absolutely no issues with it. Very interestingly, not everyone who had interpreting training actually appreciated the new condition. So we were quite surprised by that, but maybe that's because, like you say, we were mixing the visual with the audio, and the interpreters were more accustomed to just having the audio. So definitely that needs studying. Excellent. I shall add it to the list.
A new variable.
Well, yeah, everyone
just to complicate things further.
a new experiment, and we
Yeah.
can redesign it. Thank you for the suggestion.
We have a few questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And one question was about the metric you use for evaluation. And I think Iman was asking what is the metric used in evaluation for quality of edited MT.
Thank you so much for that. I should have mentioned it. So we used the DQF subset of the MQM error typology, and we had 2 in-house evaluators who produced the gold standard. So initially individually, and then discussed and merged it, and that's how the gold standard was produced. The students received also training in using the error typology, although again, some of them interpreted it quite creatively, as Justus and Claudia will attend NET in next week, and Justus will be presenting some of these findings. But to come back to the question, it was the DQFM subset of the MQM typology.
And yeah, if I can follow up with the question about the errors. Did you notice that by listening to speech, certain types of errors were more likely to be corrected than others? Or there is a very similar distribution of the errors corrected?
So in the revision experiment, we found that accuracy errors were spotted. So mistranslations, omissions were spotted more. In the post-editing, we're looking at several things in the post-editing experiment. One, we're looking at annotations throughout the 4 experiment conditions, and in those, we're seeing that the students kind of mirrored, on average, they mirrored the gold standard. So in the gold standard, we had a lot of mistranslations, and then we had several style issues and grammatical register. So that was grammar and grammatical register. Sorry, to list them in order, if I remember correctly. Mistranslations were the biggest category in the MT output, and then we had style, so awkward style or unidiomatic. Unidiomatic was actually more frequently used than awkward. And finally, the grammar and grammatical register were the next categories in the gold standard. And the students kind of identified pretty much the same on average. But again, there were individual differences. There was also a difference we identified between native speakers and non-native speakers. So the native speakers were a lot more confident identifying and correcting the style errors, whereas the non-natives perhaps understandably not so much. Also, the students used a lot the other category that we have in the typology. Sometimes even for listing things that actually had a category. Broadly, we saw that, and again, this is a hypothesis, because on average, they kind of canceled each other's extremes out. We saw this as an indication that when we plan a post-editing workshop or a course even, there is a bit of apprehension on the part of some of our trainers, because you're looking at several weeks of lecture-directed instruction. And what we think we saw in our data is that actually the students can teach themselves fairly well as well. So group work should definitely be part of that aspect. But at the same time, the students also misunderstand some of the categories and they need guidance too. So there is an element for the teacher, but it shouldn't be pressure on the teacher to do everything, but rather trusting the students also and seeing how they interpret certain categories, because we're all translators here. We know how difficult it is to get 2 people to agree on something. And that's also one of the reasons why perhaps we have such a wider distribution of errors and bigger use of the categories from the part of our students than from the part of our gold standard, because it's easier to get 2 people to agree than to get 17.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a question from Marisha. Sorry,
Maria, can you hear me?
Maria, okay.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, thank you, Dragoș, for this very interesting, very motivating talk. I have a question about whether you perhaps measured the time it took them in these 4 different conditions or iterations, because my feeling is that the time would be different. And I don't know if that would play a role. So you told us you gave them 45 minutes or so, but were there any variations, and do you see time playing a role, any role in this thing?
Oh yes, you've touched on the one of the biggest things that we've learned from this experiment. And again, it might help, I hope, those in the audience, those students preparing the experiment. Don't limit the time of your participants. Otherwise, you're just causing so much work for yourself, trying to harmonize and interpret the findings and try and report on some common ground. So yeah, as Maria rightly suggested, we found that it took, in those 45 minutes, only very few students actually finished the task. So in 45 minutes, we have results which range from full text post-edited and annotated to half the text. So then this means that it's when we are reporting the errors, it's very challenging to first see what kind of errors were in that half that was actually finished in order to report on something that's a little bit reliable. So yeah, students worked at different paces, and in future experiments, we're definitely gonna allow them to take the time they need. And also another learning point, we set the 45-minute rate more or less thinking of what an industry expectation would be from a post-editing job. So we said if it's sort of roughly 600 words, but we know that sometimes it can go up to 900 words, but we started at the low end. So if we say if an industry expectation is 600 words per hour, then 45 minutes for about 400, 450 words is acceptable. But then, of course, what we were quite optimistic about was that our trainees were up to the task. And again, some were, but not all. And that's why all the findings, all the charts, all the stats that you see actually took a long time, and Justus and Claudia are absolute heroes for making sure that we're actually talking about what we should be talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More questions?
Nobody wants to do experiments now? Please don't.
I think it's great.
Please.
I'm going to ask you a question about the next steps, because you're talking about trying to see how this would integrate in a CAD tool. So, and I was wondering, if you take a tool like Trados, there are already so many windows, buttons. I'm just wondering, what would be the impact on if you design this into a plugin for Trados to really help translators? What would be the impact on their workflow to have yet another source of things to press to? Because I suppose that they also need to have the option to go back and forth through your audio if they want to listen again.
Exactly. Yeah. You're super right. And also, this is why in Leeds for our revision experiment, we stuck mainly with source text, because at that point there was no plugin for anything. So we kind of had to fake the environment a little bit, and we pre-recorded the source segments. And what we were hoping and dreaming about was an environment where the translator, or the reviser in this case, would simply say, play source 1, play source 2, or that kind of stuff. And initially we thought we had a good chance of engineering this using Dragon naturally speaking voice commands, custom commands, and MemoQ. But then the latency was really high. No translator was willing to wait about 8 seconds to listen, to hear the source. So that's why we had to fake it. And also, like you say, a translator, after hearing the target, they might make some changes and then they want to hear the target again. And we couldn't, we could have read it out loud over their shoulder, but that would be just a very strange setup. So where are we now? We are in a situation where for Trados there is this additional plugin called TTS, text to speech, and fortunately it comes with shortcuts. So what we have tested a little bit, but only internally, so I can't say for the wider community, is that you can customize Dragon commands, and you can even ask now if you decide which language do you want to listen to, the source or the target. You can just have a custom command linked to the shortcut because it's quite a long shortcut. And then the plugin just plays the sound for you as many times as you want, and you can do all kinds of work. The students, when they were working in Word, where we have all the voices already, they did mention that, first of all, the quality of the voices wasn't as high. So whether this is a young person's problem more than a real problem, usability is important, and this is an aspect. And then the implementation was also a bit iffy because in this bilingual document, so the interface will jump from cell to cell, and you would have to manually stop and then click where you want to start again, and it was a bit of a faff. So I totally agree with you that usability has to feature a lot. I think it's encouraging that we have plugins that can be operated by shortcuts. So for a translator who's used to using shortcuts anyway, for confirming, for concordancing, for everything, learning another useful shortcut will probably be actually an okay task. But the fact that we have software like Dragon naturally speaking, which we can use for dictation, but we can also use to create custom voice commands to operate the computer, I think that also adds to the usability. I think the easiest thing would be to have a play button on either side of the source segment and the target segment with shortcuts linked to it. But I don't know how much I can say, but I think that's coming. Well, I know that's coming, but I don't know exactly when, and it's work in progress.
Thank you. I think we have a question from Iman, and then Maria.
Yes, thank you so much. This is an interesting session. Thank you so much for this session. I'm just wondering, the plugin TTS in Trados, can it help the visually impaired? Because I did the experiment before in order to test the accessibility of Trados and MemoQ, and unfortunately they are not accessible at all, especially the interface of source and target segments. It's not accessible. Maybe the menus and all of this stuff. However, the source and target segments are not accessible at all for visually impaired. So my question is, can this new plugin in Trados TTS help the visually impaired translators to eventually use Trados?
I would love to say yes. And with some part of our community, we've logged feature requests to make it even more user-friendly to use the TTS plugin. Because at the moment, as you have seen me on the screen, I played the target, but then in order to play the source, I had to go into 2 different menus, drag a window, change an option, click OK.
Yes.
So it's not that easy.
At all, yes.
So I would say at the moment, a visually impaired translator would be probably much more efficient exporting texts. If the client sends text in CAT tools, maybe the client themselves can export the text as a bilingual file.
In my experience, I could let them use SmartCat, because in SmartCat you can upload SDLXLF files, the SDLTM, all of the package, the SDL-RPX, so they can use the SmartCat as an alternative for Trados. So this is like a workaround, and I explored this thing with them, and eventually they can work on Trados files on SmartCat. So it's really interesting, and I can share my paper. I published my experiment in this on this regard. I can share it with you.
Please, that would be super interesting, and thank you for trying this. And as everyone here, I mean, you've demonstrated very clearly.
Is the best one as an alternative for Trados. MemSource, the desktop version in MemSource, it's accessible. MidCat, however, MidCat cannot. The SDL-RPX, the package, Trados package, cannot be opened in MidCat. However, the SDLXLF and SDLTM can be opened with the MidCat. However, SmartCat is better than MidCat. MemSource, if there are tasks on MemSource, so the MemSource desktop version is accessible somehow. So these are my findings, and I hope that there will be more improvement on CAT tools for visually impaired translators in future, inshallah.
Yes, there was a project, if I'm not mistaken, from well, I've heard Jos Morkens talk about it, called Kanjingo. And that was designed from the ground up as an accessible CAT tool. So that could be also an option worth exploring. So contacting Jos and gaining access to the Kanjingo interface.
Okay, thank you. I'll test it.
Let me write. I hope I'm not misspelling it, but I think that's how it's spelled. Kanjingo, the name of their tool.
Okay, thank you so much.
No, thank you. I mean, as we can see, we are at the place where, or at the point in time where we have a lot of technologies that are useful, but they're not integrated, and then researchers and professionals have to find workarounds. And
yes.
It's a nice creative challenge, I guess, but I think at some point we kind of also would like just to, but we might also want just to do the job. But yeah, thank you for sharing the workaround with us.
Thank you.
Maria?
Yes, I have a technical question. You mentioned the TTS plugin in Trados, but you also said it's an Azure service. It's a Microsoft Azure key that you actually enter. Am I getting that right?
Yes,
so you need to have an account with Azure to be able to do it. And does it work with MemoQ as well?
No. So the TTS plugin is only for Trados. So far, Microsoft have been very kind, and they've only billed me €1 for all the use. But you know, I'm mainly using the tool for demonstrations, and I used it on a job where halfway through the translation job, I decided that actually the target text and the type of text I was translating wasn't really the most appropriate one for this particular use. So I'm not using it every day. I don't know how high the charge rates would be. For MemoQ, what you can do if you have Dragon Naturally Speaking is, because MemoQ fully supports Dragon Naturally Speaking, you can both dictate, but you can also request the text-to-speech that Dragon actually provides. So in MemoQ, in the language that is enabled at that time for Dragon, you can listen, but otherwise there is no additional plugin. And we're going back to what Iman was saying about having to export the bilingual and then open it up in something else, which is slightly better. So is that
not even with EOS? Not even with the EOS integration? I'm not using Dragon in MemoQ. I'm using the EOS Hey MemoQ feature. It doesn't have the read aloud. If I'm
as
not
far as I know,
mistaken.
no. You can only
Okay.
dictate, but you can't listen.
Okay, thank you very much. Any last minute question? We already took advantage of Dragoș a lot, so it's almost.
No, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
I mean, this, like you said, this is the fun part, the
Yeah.
Q&A. And thank you for the enthusiasm and for also the tips. So I'm learning stuff as well. So this is good for me. Don't worry about me.
I don't know how many of the people in the audience paid attention to the subtitles. Someone asked to enable, so I said yes. It's quite interesting, and yeah, just I laughed earlier because there was something around. I said we took advantage of drugs quite a lot, and you get all this pearls of automatic speech recognition. And I'm just wondering, you talked a lot about the speech synthesis. What about the speech recognition? Do you think we are getting there in order to help translators? Do you think it's better to dictate the text, or we are still safer with the keyboard?
Well,
I'm just opening a whole can of worms that will keep us here till the evening.
No. I mean, we can also summarize this and make it a little jar of worms. I would, so again, from our surveys of the professionals who use dictation, some ideas really jump up. So, for instance, some professionals are noticing that they write in a more formal manner, for more formal style than they speak. So, for instance, if the translation job requires text that will be spoken, for instance, maybe they're doing a museum guided tour content, or something like that, then translating in a very formal way is not going to lead to an ideal product. And also what Raluca Kereji in her PhD project is going to look at is the fact that for the informed consent forms in the medical domain, they need to be very accessible, very readable, because the patients who need to read them are not medical experts. So again, if we are typing in a formal manner just because that's how we work, then maybe there is a real potential there for dictating more informally, more understandably, more fluently, more and are we there yet or not? In terms of supported languages, things are getting better. As I've shown in Google Docs, the range of languages is improving. There are also startups developing speech recognition for languages, smaller languages, which are not covered by the big companies. But also from personal experience, my German is terrible. And so the center has very kindly agreed to allow me to teach in English. And in the first semester, I started, so back in 2020, in October, recognizing that some of my students might have issues. So, English is not, they don't use English as frequently as maybe I do. I also enabled for my lectures the Microsoft Translator text-to-speech and MT functionality. And after each lecture, I save also that transcription because I'm interested in it. And I see a big jump in quality. So it's a genuine jump in quality. Also, the quality of the engine in recognizing ends of sentences rather than just stopping whenever is also impressive. Microsoft, so Chris Vent from Microsoft was talking to me about how that is. So it's not really that smart at the moment, not very dynamic, but still it's good enough. I think speech recognition has the added benefit for the user of making all of us aware of how we speak. And do we use fillers? Do we use like? Every other word is like something like, which might be okay in conversation with our friends, but is not that amazing if we want to send a professional email to a customer. So I think there are a lot of, and also, when we use speech recognition, at least when I use speech recognition, the biggest hurdle was to get over the fact that I have to listen to my own voice. So, but then that led to a bit more confidence in speaking in public and perhaps better presentation skills. I don't know, you'll be the judges of that. So there are all of these additional benefits in addition to the most obvious one, for which I will always love speech recognition for, which is being able to close my eyes or just look out of the window and continue to dictate and not stare at the screen all day, every day. So I would say the quality is there. It would be super useful to have even more languages, but that's also coming. And it's all based on data. So if we can contribute to all of these projects and submit data and help out, I think we'll do that for a greater good.
Thank you very much. The audience is very quiet, so I think we exhausted them. You exhausted them.
Brilliant. That's the result. So it's not just my students, right? I've just done this now on a global level. Great. I'll never get another invitation ever again.
Now, I'm sure that everybody is very happy with your presentation. There's been so many interesting ideas, lots of food for thought. So
thank you so much for the invitation. And also thank you for all the kind vibes. It's a really nice atmosphere and really nice community that you have built with the Convergence series.
Thank you. Yeah, we are very pleased to see that at every lecture people turn up and they're interested. So thank you. There were some questions on the chat about the slides recording. The recording will become available on our YouTube channel and on our website. It will take a few days till it will happen, but it will be there if you want to watch. You know how to get in touch with Dragoș. He put his contact details at the beginning of the talk, and they were also in the invitation. Thank you to Dragoș for giving the talk. Thank you to the audience for being patient and being actively involved in this. And have a nice evening and rest of the week, and stay safe.
Thank you all as well, and recover quickly.